So as we can see, there are many issues surrounding the current time in the United States. And to discuss the latest issues there, I'm joined by Paolo von Schirach, the president of the Global Policy Institute. Mr. Schirach, thank you for joining us today on Anews. Just 26 days left till the 3rd of November in the US presidential elections. The issues should be clear by now, and they should be in the home straight, but things aren't quite so simple, are they?
No, they're not. Well, if you look at the polls give Joe Biden as the clear favorite. In fact, his margins have increased in the last few days, and that would be a good sign if you are in the Biden campaign. Unfortunately, the memories of 2016 are still stinging. Pollsters were disastrously wrong at that time, and they underestimated the ability of Mr. Trump to surge at the end of the campaign and win, even though he won by an extremely narrow margin when it comes to the votes that got him over the hump in the Electoral College. We have a very complicated system here to elect a president. That said, another complication this year is COVID, because of the unprecedented number of people who, fearing contagion, will opt to vote by mail. Now, this would sound like a pretty simple, straightforward thing, but it is not, because the norms, the rules of how to vote by mail vary state by state here in the United States of America, and some are quite confusing. And so, when is a mail-in ballot valid? Is it when it's mailed, when it's received, when it's postmarked? Can there be irregularities in the way in which the form is widely for litigation? Mm-hmm. In the unfortunate event of a very close election, you can expect litigation.
And that obviously is yet another huge issue in itself, as both parties have different views on how that should go forward. And the Attorney General has been perhaps taking a rather unusual stance in the last, as opposed to previous Attorney Generals, in the way in which he's dealing with national issues.
Well, that is correct. Again, keep in mind that this is even more complicated by the federal nature of the United States of America's government. So some matters are dealt with at the federal level and some at the state level. There is no federal norm that regulates mail-in balloting. Mm-hmm. However, here's the thing. Should there be litigation that cannot be resolved at a lower level, this will creep up possibly up to the level of the Supreme Court of the United States. And that becomes a federal issue, even though that will be the judiciary, as opposed to the government deciding it. Some of us remember year 2000, when essentially it was the Supreme Court of the United States that determined which ballots were valid in the state of Florida, right. And in so doing, determined that George Bush Jr. was the winner.
And, of course, that brings up another one of the curveballs in this election season, the issue of the Supreme Court itself. Will the hearings for Amy Bartlett continue? Will those be held?
Yes, I think there's every expectation that, notwithstanding this atmosphere, which is rather chaotic here, of course, which included Mr. Trump contracting COVID and then going to the military hospital, et cetera, et cetera. But the fact is quite clear. The Constitution gives the president, who is the sitting, lawful president, the power to nominate a new justice for the Supreme Court if a vacancy occurs. And of course, what matters is whether or not he's got the votes in the Senate, which constitutionally has the task to vet the nominee and vote on his, in this case, her, nomination. Right. It is clear that the Republicans in the Senate have the votes, narrowly, but have the votes. So I think it is fair to expect that this judge will be vetted and voted and most likely approved, unless there is some dramatic, change of mind on the part of some senators. They have a majority at least of 2 at the moment, and so that's enough to vote her, to confirm her.
Of course, in election season, the nomination of judges and the Supreme Court is a huge political carrot for many voters, but also, of course, is the economy. Let's talk about the American people and the economy. How the economy was fairly sound at the beginning of the year, and that's the feet have been knocked out from under it, from what we understand, and of course the stimulus package is again being tossed about in the political discussions. So let's unpack that a little bit.
Okay, well, as you said, the economy started, pretty well in January. This looks like, another geological era now, January 2020. The economy was growing at approximately 2.some%, 2.3, 2.4%, which again is, by the way, it's a lot less than what Mr. Trump had promised, which was 3, 4, 5%, but still quite respectable by any standard, 2.4%. Unemployment was at a historic low, which was really good because of many people being able to get jobs, including, as the president has pointed out many times, minorities, black voters, black citizens, Hispanic Americans, and what have you. Then COVID struck, and everything went up in the air. And then it seemed for a while that this would be the typical, V-shaped, recession and recovery curve. Well, it has happened to some extent. The economy has recovered a great deal of ground, and many people regained their jobs. However, we're still not out, not out of the woods by any means. Unemployment is still very high. It is around 8% as we speak today, and many people have been hurt very badly. And some jobs will never come back. It's quite clear that it will be impossible to go back, in an easy way to the way we were before. Not to mention the fact that 210,000 Americans are dead. That's an astonishingly high number. So that means that the management of COVID is sort of intertwined with the economic consequences of the pandemic in terms of lockdowns and closures and closing businesses and forcing people to work from home, those who can, and others not work at all. So right now, Mr. Biden has pretty good arguments saying this president has mishandled COVID and has caused unnecessary economic damage to millions of Americans. And again, the polls would indicate that, right or wrong, many people seem to be inclined to believe him, and that if he were in charge, Biden, things would be better for the management of the pandemic and as a consequence for the lessening the economic impact that it has had.
And that actually raises an interesting question, that one of the things that might reassure people, one might expect that Donald Trump would want to push forward a stimulus package, but earlier this week he pulled back, and I believe he may have flip-flopped again on that. So for the daily needs of people, will there be a stimulus package before the election?
Very difficult to say. A few weeks ago, one would have thought that the Democrats and Republicans in Congress would have figured out a way, listening to the proposals coming from the White House, that there would be a way to bridge the gap between a very, very large package proposed by Nancy Pelosi, who is the Democratic Speaker of the House, and the Republicans in the White House, of course, and in the Senate. Then, then they seemed like impossible to bridge the gap. And then Mr. Trump, after he came back from the hospital, said, no, nothing. We're not going to do anything. After I win, he says, we are going to have a new package. So that means after November 3rd. Mm-hmm. Well, then he backtracked this, and it's not quite clear where we are. Every day this story keeps changing, and this, quite frankly, quite baffling, because we are talking about the lives of millions of people. Right now, it seems to be the primary target seems to be what to do to support airlines. The airlines are bleeding money left and right because clearly they have no passengers. So they're losing money on a daily basis. And some of them committed to maintain certain services in terms of flights connecting major cities, but they're flying empty or semi-empty. And so they say, hey, we cannot sustain this. And they have already announced not just furloughs, but firing tens of thousands of people. So are we going to do, is there a special intervention for the airlines and then the rest will come later? It's really unclear. And the story keeps changing every day.
Of course, the issues surrounding the US presidential election don't just affect the United States. They, in many ways, affect the world, and not only the world's economy, but also foreign policy between different countries. One of the questions that has been very much up front here is why, whilst the Trump administration has dealt fairly even-handedly with Turkey, that why Biden has come out and spoken out against Erdogan and against Turkey. What's your take on that?
Well, look, obviously there is a different approach here. There is a concern, which is widespread here in the United States, about a perception of authoritarianism in Turkey. Now, that's a perception, and people may be wrong, and there are different ways of looking at it. Mr. Trump has privately, even in his and when he was talking to Bob Woodward, the journalist who wrote the latest book, Rage, say, I don't know why, I really get along very well with autocrats. He said that, with strong people. I get along with Xi Jinping, I get along with Putin, I get along with Erdogan. So that was his take, meaning I have a way to strong people appeal to me, and I get along with them, and I can deal with them. Now that's I don't know what to make of that. So Mr. Biden may have a different approach, and there are concerns, which, as I said, justified or unjustified, which may dampen this, enthusiasm for person-to-person, leader-to-leader diplomacy. But I would say this: Mr. Biden is not an extremist, and the people around him, talking about those who are likely to fill the ranks, the upper echelons of the administration when it comes to foreign and security policies. These are all veterans of the Democratic Party, of the Obama administration, and what have you. These are not ideologues, and these are not extremists. These are pragmatic people who, if anything, talking about U.S. foreign policy, would like to tone down the volume and the temperature when it comes to Europe in general. Of course, Turkey is a special case, admittedly, because there are special issues that characterize, the relationship between Turkey and its region and the bilateral relationship with the United States. But I do not expect any freezing of relations. I wouldn't say that that's in the cards.
Well, that's good to hear. Of course, as you say, it's a perception, and many perceptions are based on wrong information. Just one final question, then. Who is going to be successful in 26 days' time? Well, first of all, 26 days' time, will there be a result on the 3rd of November? And if there is, or if it's delayed, who will be successful?
Well, look, that's a good question. It's really hard to say. I am looking at the polls in the so-called swing states, those states where margins are fairly narrow, and those are the states that gave the victory to Donald Trump in 2016. In all of these swing states, and I'm referring particularly to Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, which got Trump elected, Mr. Biden is ahead. In fact, it seems that his margins have actually grown in the last few days. If these margins stay and are solid, they don't evaporate between now and November 3rd, he wins. I don't see how that cannot happen. But again, things can happen, and they do happen here. And also the unknown factor is whether or not, cognizant of the lessons of 2016, the pollsters have managed to factor into their polls those who, and apparently there are many, who are for Trump but don't want to say it,
right,
are simply not going to say to a pollster, I am voting for Mr. Trump, for whatever reasons. And apparently in 2016, that fooled the pollsters who got the wrong numbers and therefore made the wrong projections. Now, they say they learned the lesson and they know how to do better polling that is more scientific and more reliable, et cetera, et cetera. Again, if the big margins, the wide margins that Mr. Biden enjoys nationally, which, by the way, are far, far higher than those enjoyed by Mrs. Clinton back in 2016, if these margins, which are now about 10%, hold, I don't really see, short of a miracle, how Mr. Trump can win. So the only scenario that I see possible is that, again, the Trump supporters have been disastrously undercounted. And so, you know, with caution, I would say Mr. Biden wins. But I may, but I don't feel good about saying this because I may be proven wrong.
I think the one thing we can be certain of is that there's uncertainty, and as you say, things change almost every minute, it seems. Thank you very much, Paolo von Schirach, for joining us on Anews.
Thank you.
That